This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thanks, Ed, and welcome to everyone, all our viewers, all our listeners to Voices in Validation, a podcast brought to you from the IVT Network. I am excited to have in studio with me today Matthew LaPierre. He's a data integrity industry expert. He helps all of the pharmaceutical folks navigate that audit trail process.
Sure, yeah.
Which sounds like such a big deal. I mean, if you talk to them, it is, right?
Yeah. I mean, everyone's trying to get a big handle over data integrity and audit trails and audit trail reviews. So I like to think that I'm helping them smooth that process more quickly for them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so important. So important. So I wanted to talk to you about that today.
Sure.
Just that whole process of the audit trail and kind of putting people at ease so that they understand a little bit more what to expect and what is within their control,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
So pharma companies, audit trails can feel like the Wild West sometimes. They don't know what to expect. It's scary. It's challenging. Feels like they're moving into uncharted territory, and they might not have the right resources, or feel they don't have the right resources, whatever. So can you talk a little bit about that, that whole,
the beast that we like to
where
call
have we come from? Because
integrity.
I know it's not a new concept, as you mentioned earlier, but it is somewhat new to pharmaceuticals. So
Sure.
if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yep. So audit trails and audit trail reviews really fall under the category of data integrity. And whenever you say data integrity or talk about it to an inspector or to an auditor, or even within your company to senior leaders, they always kind of take a step back and they're like, this is a big animal. This is the Wild West. How do we uncover the truths about what we need to do? And so I facilitate a lot of trainings for pharmaceutical companies. And what I like to do first is I ask, when did you first hear the words data integrity?
Sure.
And some people, analysts in the laboratory or people on the manufacturing floor, oftentimes will say this year, or last year or the year before. I don't know if you remember the Ranbaxy incident, that big disaster that happened with Ranbaxy.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard first the words data integrity probably back in 2008.
Okay.
That's when the Ranbaxy huge tragedy was occurring and happening. The FDA went in and they withdrew 34 different NDAs for drugs that Ranbaxy was putting out. Because they found these dramatic instances of data integrity breaches. And what you were seeing was falsification of data, manipulation of data, taking values from a C of A and completely making them different so that they would pass. And as a pharmaceutical industry environment in the US, we thought that all these data integrity vulnerabilities and breaches just happened in the East, that it didn't affect people in the West, it didn't affect the US. This was just like bad apples and bad people. But as you saw in 2016 and 2017, there was this huge uprise in data integrity violations in the US.
Right.
I mean, the amount of warning letters that we saw was nearly tripling and quadrupling every single year. And so it's not just people in China and in India,
Right.
It's actually at home on US soil, which is very scary. So back after Ranbaxy and back after Able Laboratories and all these really, really big, dramatic instances of data integrity breaches, we saw the MHRA, we saw the FDA, we saw PICS, the WHO, all of these regulatory bodies putting out these data integrity guidances to help guide us through the Wild West that is DI.
Sure.
So this is 2016 was when the draft guidance came out from the FDA, and then it just became effective last year in 2018. So this is what we have to do now in order to
Sure.
get where they're expecting us. And because they're putting all this stuff out, I mean, the guidance has, audit trails and audit trail reviews. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
But that was the first instance that we saw of that
Right.
in 2016. So when people say, this is new, this is crazy, this is insane, it's because that it is.
Right.
We're just starting to hear that, these are things that we have to do.
And so it seems to me the guidances are only guidances until they're actually implemented. And then there's some sort of follow through, right? So I'm assuming, and I know we're going to talk about audit trails, but that there needs to be a regulatory arm that is supervising all of this as it rolls into pharmaceutical, correct?
Sure. That the line between guidance and what needs to happen from a regulatory perspective is very blurred for me.
Okay.
If the agency says this is what we are expecting, this is what we're recommending to do, I always push for you need to do it.
Right.
The hard part is figuring out how it best fits into your company and how to do it the right way.
Sure.
But it really comes down to, and this is what all of the guidance documents talk about, is control. Do you have control over your data? And the faster that we as a technology industry start to complex our computerized systems that we have, the more we realize that the control is really, really hard to get and to gain over all of these complexities that we've been seeing.
Great point. I mean, so we're seeing this data integrity guidance coming into the industry. We're also seeing AI, big data.
Oh gosh, big data.
Yeah. So how is it that the industry is having such a challenging time tracking and maintaining audit trails if we have all of these new tools and these new guidances? Help me understand where the big challenge is.
Okay. So I like to say when I facilitate these trainings that an audit trail really is your network stalker. It's your internet stalker. So it tracks every single thing that you do on your computerized system whenever you're doing anything. So it tracks when you log into the system, which method that you select to run against, how many samples that you run when you run them, if you changed, manipulated, created, modified, deleted any data. That's going to be seen in your audit trail. So if you have, bad people, or if you have people that are cutting corners a little bit, you can tell that they're doing that via the audit trail.
Sure.
So, when inspectors are going into companies, that's what they're looking for. They will get access and gain access to your computerized system, and they will say, show me the audit trail. And they'll be able to tell exactly what you did and if you manipulated or did anything to cut a corner or that was funky in some way. So back to what you were saying with AI and big data, your audit trail, because it's your network stalker,
right?
It's gaining all of this data, and it's so much of it. And so for someone to say, you need to review your audit trail now, that's like their mind is blown. They're like, this is so much data that now I have to sift through to see if somebody made a minor error somewhere in the history of the audit trail. It's huge. And so big data and AI is really taking and finding really simple ways to get all of this data in one place and start to pick and choose which ones are potentially vulnerable or potentially have been manipulated or deleted in some way or fashion to produce a more favorable response or answer or result. So, when you talk about big data, you have Amazon, you have Facebook, you have all of these different companies that are taking millions of data points from you,
right,
as you put your data points on social media or you put certain insights or opinions that you have into the open, and then they take that and put it into their big generator of information, and they can pinpoint and figure out which way you're leaning towards in a political match, or which things that you might buy on social media,
sure,
right? So why can't we take that same data and do the same thing,
right,
and manipulate it and trend it in certain ways to figure out who the problem is and what the problem is and how to fix it, right?
Sure.
If all these other companies are doing it, we have the tools to do it too, but why aren't we? So,
right.
yeah.
So it sounds like a great tool to have as an company owner or
Sure.
company, stockholder, I guess, because you can pinpoint where the flaws are in your process.
Sure.
So why so much fear around it?
Sure. So as a pharmaceutical environment, it takes a lot of time to introduce a new system into service.
Mm-hmm.
So you say, I want a new UV vis, right, to
Right.
measure absorbance or spectrometry and whatever your sample that you're testing. And you say, all right, these are the requirements that it needs to meet in my URS. I'm going to pick a vendor now to select the instrument that I want. I have to qualify that instrument, right? I have to validate it to make sure that it produces the same things and results over and over and over. And then after that, I have to get my test method or my manufacturing batch record and qualify that in turn as well to make sure that it corresponds and correlates with the instrument that you have. So you're talking about 6 months to a year, and then qualifying the method, which might take another 6 months. It's a year and a half before you are in full implementation of this new computer software that is going to fix and repair and be able to gain all of that big data that you have.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense.
So
it's time consuming.
It's so time consuming, it's costly.
I've heard companies spend like 20% of a project on validation, just on validation.
Yeah.
Right.
It's why you have consulting companies that are specific just for validation.
Sure.
Companies can just hire a consulting company to come in and validate certain piece of equipment that they have because they don't have the resources in order to do that on site. So if you want to have trending of your big data so that you're not looking at thousands of data points in an audit trail for a standalone system, there's a lot of work that needs to be done with that.
Understood.
And a lot of money that needs to be spent and time. So instead, what we have now is companies looking at standalone systems that aren't networked, so they can't transfer data anywhere. It's like one specific software system that only interacts with itself. And they're looking through thousands of data points in their audit trail to figure out what has been falsified, if anything, and trying to trend the data themselves, which is nearly impossible.
I would think so. And are there software as a service type companies out there that are providing sort of a cookie cutter, system, or is it just always that these pharmaceutical companies need to kind of build from the ground up within their organization?
So as I said before, and this is very controversial, so I want to say this and have this be my opinion only. The regulatory requirement, the regulatory recommendation, it's not really a recommendation, more of a requirement, to review audit trails is really from 2016 that they started to say that. And again, that's my opinion. You look at 21 CFR Part 11 and it shows that you're writing on a piece of paper, right, on paper, and you make an error. What do you need to do to fix that error? You have to diagonally cross it out or cross it out so that you can see the before and put the after close to it so you can see where that is. It needs to have your initials and date to show that you are the person that did it and a reason of why you're changing that data point. So if you're doing that on paper and it's tracked so well, electronically, you should be doing the same thing.
Sure.
You should be able to show who did it, why, what it was before, and what it was after. And if you're not reviewing that, then you're kind of not complying with 21 CFR Part 11. But we didn't realize that. We had no idea.
Gotcha.
Like, it just was a complete oversight. So 2016 came out with the FDA guidance, and we all were like, this is insane. I can't believe that we have to do this. This is going to take so long. How do we do it? I've been to dozens of companies. I've audited dozens of companies. And I have not seen one company do it well. Very rarely do we find anyone actually reviewing audit trails. And if they are doing it, it's very simple and it's very time consuming and there's flaws. So,
sure. Well, I mean, because not only is it new, not only is this guidance new, but now it sounds like it's a new job within your organization because now you have to have someone who's actually watching this, like looking at it.
and it gets so much more intense and dramatic. Not only do you need to do it, but you have to do it before the batch is released. Right? So you have to make sure that batch has integrity, that it's safe, effective, and reliable. And if you have to look at the audit trails of every computerized system used to generate those data points on your C of A, that's massive. That's all of your computerized systems in QC. That's all of your computerized systems in manufacturing. Where do you get the manpower and the time and the resources to review maybe 50 different systems, audit trails?
Right.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
So we need to get to the point where we can use big data, where we have softwares that we find that can take all of this data that we're generating and put it into a system in a magical way and find falsification or potential data integrity vulnerabilities. But until then, we are stuck looking at every single system before the batch is released to see the audit trail. And
and it seems to me that time is of the essence, because we're talking about reliability, we're talking about efficacy, we're talking about all of these things that apply to patient safety.
Oh, completely. 100%.
Right? So it's all about, at the end of the day, producing a product or a device or whatever that's safe for the patient use, right? And that to be reliable. So talk a little bit about that, like why it is so important for audit trails and this whole review process to be implemented as it impacts the patient safety.
Okay, can I tell you about a study that relates to
please tell me about a study.
This is my favorite study, so I'm really excited to say this to you. So there was a group of people who went into a room and they were given a math exam. And math, as you know, is very difficult for anyone, right?
Right.
It's a 10-question math exam, and after they were done taking the test, they gave it to an independent reviewer who reviewed the exam, and they found that the average result of this exam is a 40%. It's a 4 out of 10, very low.
Yeah.
Math is hard. People have a hard time with it.
They haven't studied.
Yeah. Exactly, right? So they take a separate group of people and they put them into the same room and they give them that same math exam. But instead of having an independent reviewer review the results, they actually review it themselves. And so what do you think happens to that 4 out of 10?
Scores go up.
They go up. And by how much?
Up to 60%.
Sure. Okay, so you hit it on the nose.
All right, yay!
What we find a lot of the time is people say 9, people say 10.
Wow, okay.
And, I look at them and I'm like, you wouldn't be really great in our pharmaceutical environment because you're committing fraud, right? But what you find is it's a 6 out of 10. So
I was guessing low because I have faith in people.
Good.
Let's just say that.
You didn't say a 4 though.
I didn't say a 4.
You didn't say
I don't have that much faith.
But you find that people cheat out of temptation, and no one wants to be a bad person, but it's there.
Right.
It's in your face. It's not what you're thinking of, what happened in India where people are changing things on a C of A that, were not the result that it was, that it's completely different. These people, in the math exam, they could have said, I made this tiny error, but I knew what I was doing, so I'm just going to change it. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
And what you find is there's all this temptation in the pharmaceutical environment to do just that. It's not the end result that people are changing. It's the cutting corners in the middle or in the beginning that potentially compromises the data. And so, you figure out that people are doing this via the audit trail, but I've been at companies who just start implementing these audit trail reviews. And, within the first week of doing it, they find that Sally Mae has been cutting a corner tiny here and there. And, over the years, it didn't seem like it made a difference. But as we start to trend that data, we realized that there was supposed to be an uphill trend where the product might have supposedly would gone out of spec, but because she was cutting a corner, it was going back in spec. So it's not getting that accurate data. But, the days of saying that data integrity is this dramatic falsification of data, it's not true. It's these little instances of temptation that we feel in the laboratory. I mean, you're trying to get the product out the door, right? You're trying to make money, and leadership want that. They want supply chain to be rolling with the punches. They want the QC laboratory to test and release product very quickly. And, if you have a failure and your management's going to get mad at that, but you can, integrate that peak just slightly to make it pass, there's temptation to do that.
Right.
And you're like, hey, this is just QC. We're
Yeah.
not manufacturing the product. We're just making sure it's okay. So why not, compromise it a little bit? Why not move the integration of that peak a little bit more in my favor so that it doesn't fail?
Right.
So yeah, temptation is there. And once companies start to invest time and resources into reviewing audit trails, they're going to find that 100% of companies have falsification of data. And you can only find it through audit trail
Audit
reviews,
trails. Okay.
which is the key and why we're talking about it.
Exactly. So it seems like there needs to be then a definite process in place for companies. I mean, they have to understand not only how to do it and what they're looking for, but how often and, what equipment are we going to use and on and on. So developing a plan then for how they're going to carry this out would seem like it's a very important piece of this whole of managing the audit review for a company. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then you have this whole FDA guidance and their rules and regulations that you also have to incorporate. So how does a company manage all of those pieces, knowing that, and I know because I've spoken to you before, that this is still somewhat muddy water. Like, what is a company to do? I mean, what do you recommend to some of them? It just seems like it could be overwhelming, I guess. So how do you allay some of those fears?
You just put a lot out there, and I'm really excited to address a lot of it because you're right. This is the key. How to do this is really what companies are trying to figure out. If you can't move to an overarching interfacing system that gets all of your data, how do you implement specific audit trails for your computerized systems? So I think the first step is understanding your computerized system. And I'll put the two words out there that are kind of buzzwords is data mapping.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most underappreciated exercise. You walk into a company and you say, here, let me get your operation and maintenance specific procedures for all of your computerized systems. And I always find that that's a gap. There's not an understanding of how the data is moving through the computerized system. And that is your first tool in order to look at your audit trail and figure out what you need to review in that audit trail. So when I say data mapping, I'm saying, what is the data lifecycle within your computerized system? How does data generate? What do you do to that generated data? And what comes out of the system from the data? So really you're looking at the configuration of your software system, of your computerized system, how the parameters that you input to the system and change potentially, how that influences the data that's generated. Once data is generated, do you manipulate it in any way? Do you integrate in any way? Do you have a saved processing method that you use in order to perform some calculations to produce a value that then goes onto your C of A, right? So if you completely map out that data in your computerized system, you can start to pick apart where data integrity vulnerabilities exist.
Okay.
So if you have, for instance, you create your sample and you put it onto the machine and you log into the machine using your credentials of whatever sort, and then you select a method, a pre-configured method that has all the different parameters that you need in order to produce that data result. You push the method, you push start, and it generates data. My big data integrity vulnerability sense would state what is in that method. Is it parameters that you can adjust yourself? Is it parameters that were pre-approved or pre-selected or configured by an admin to the system who has specific rights? So in that way, you can start to pick apart the different controls that are needed for that system to make sure that that data point has integrity and was not compromised. So when you're reviewing and looking at your process for audit trails, you say, okay, that method could be manipulated. There are certain fields in that method that could be manipulated. So as part of my audit trail, I'm going to go in and see that method to see if it was manipulated in any way. And you can put, severity, detection, and probability to the risk of changing that and what it would do to your data point. And then from there, calculate if you have to review that before the batch is released or make a case to do it periodically if it doesn't really change that much.
Right.
But this is the complexity of our systems these days. It's very, very hard to do this because your data map for all of your systems will be different, dramatically different. What is your input and what's your output? The differences and complexities between them are going to differ hugely between system to system. So create your data map, find the vulnerabilities for each data point and for each change in that data as it progresses through your system, and then figure out your risks according to that, and then put together a risk level time management piece for reviewing those audit trails and those trigger points in your data.
So just as every product is different, it sounds like every audit,
computerized system
every computerized system, you're going to need a different method or a different way of reviewing, or they're all unique, is what it sounds like to me.
They're incredibly unique.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that being said, talking about data mapping, are there concrete protocols that are out there? No. Just to make it even more challenging.
Oh my God, it's widely challenging. So you have all of these really good data integrity specific guidelines.
Right.
From PICS, like I said, WHO has one, ISBE. I could go on and on and on with these incredible guidelines, but they don't talk about data mapping. They don't talk about how to review your audit trail. It's really up to you, which makes it really hard. And it's almost like the agencies don't know how to do it themselves. It's kind of like me being a consultant. I see a variety of how these people and how these companies put these processes together. And I haven't found one that I've been particularly super impressed with. And I've built some for me as well. But again, this is new. And so you develop it and you hope for the best. And, 3 years down the line, you make some tweaks to your process, right, to perfect it. But yeah, you're exactly right. There's no protocols. There's no methods or guidelines out there to teach you how to do that.
It seems incredibly difficult. I mean, even let's just say I want to do the right thing. I mean, I'm invested in doing the right thing. How do I know what the right thing is?
Oh, everyone wants to do the right thing.
Yeah,
everyone wants to do the right thing.
That's what I'm saying. So,
yep. So you what I like to do is hire another company to do it. It's an independent set of eyes.
Okay.
Right, and they come in. They've done this before at multiple companies. Usually, if companies try to do this all themselves, they're finding that they don't have a lot of resources and a lot of history to pull really good ideas from. So they're relying on people's history from other companies, which might have been 5 or 6 years ago, which is outdated. But if you hire someone to do it yourself, you're finding that they have a lot of experience with other companies and they've done this before. So that's what I would do. I would hire someone else to really do it. But I've seen data maps that are super simple. And that say, for instance, user prepares sample. User logs into system with generic credentials. User selects pre-approved method that they can't touch. User press start. User or it generates data. I've seen other ones that go very specifically into the systems that interface with it and where the data is transferred and
how they logged in. What if you log in from a machine that's not your normal machine? You know what I mean? I'm just like, that's got to affect the integrity.
Remotely logging into a system. Yeah. So it's you have to figure out where the risks are.
Right.
And if the risks are really minute and really specific, then you have to build a data map that complies with that. But it's hard to talk about it holistically because every single system will be different.
Right. Sure. Wow. So
complex.
So we have solved nothing today. Yay. No. So, but all of this being said, because it is still fairly new and it is still fairly difficult to navigate, how do you see this industry moving forward in the next few years? What do you see trending and do you anticipate?
Yes, I'm anticipating it. I cannot wait for it.
Yeah.
So we are, again, I speak at a lot of conferences. I talk to a lot of people at other companies who are looking at their audit trails and trying to figure out what to do. And everyone's really lost. And so we're all going to get to the point where we have separate SOPs that tell us how to review an audit trail for every individual system. So a certain company will have 50 different audit trail review procedures to follow before the batch is released to conduct, which is a lot of work. And we're going to start putting a lot of resources into this and a lot of time, and it's going to be massively cumbersome. And then somebody's going to flick a light bulb in their head that says, this is completely outrageous. This takes way too much time. We need to find out what Amazon's doing. And then maybe me, I'm going to
You're going to Amazon?
I'm going to create a company.
Yeah.
I'm saying this jokingly because it's kind of far-fetched, but it's a really good idea.
But not.
If someone's listening and wants to do this. Start a company and interface with Amazon potentially and say, we need to organize our data and tell our data certain things in order to trend it and to find out if our data has been compromised in any way. We shouldn't be reviewing audit trails. Audit trails should be a thing of the past.
Right.
And somebody's going to create a really magical, I say magical because it's way in the future, interesting way to find out if data has been compromised. All of our systems will be networked to one networking software, and it's going to collect every single data point and every manipulation of that data point that we have. And alarms are going to go off if somebody's in the laboratory doing something or cutting a corner. And the manager is going to come in and say, Big Brother is watching.
Yeah.
Amazon.
So how do you see AI and blockchain and all of these technologies that we're hearing about, that other industries are using, but the pharma industry hasn't really embraced yet? How is that going to impact this whole process that we're talking about?
So
if at all.
I'm saying it's the same process.
You're saying
we're going to use AIs, we're going to use big data, and we are going to do this in a much easier way.
Okay.
It's going to take, probably 10 years, to be honest. But if we can all just get to a point where all of our computerized systems are networked to one system, and then one other software system is taking that data and trending it, this would all make sense, and this would be so much easier.
Yeah.
So we need to use the technological advances that we've seen with AI and big data,
right?
And use it to our advantage. And yes, it's going to be costly, and yes, it's going to be a lot of time and resources to do it, and qualifying our software and looking at the regulatory impact of our filings, right, and changing that because that is implicated with changing test methods and all of that. But a streamlined process is needed and extremely valuable. And I'm saying this on a podcast, hoping someone can come up with it.
Right.
And, we can all start using it, because what we're doing now is borderline insane. It's outrageous. But we have to, because just like the math exam that I said earlier, right? There is temptation, and we are humans.
Yeah.
And I cannot trust you as a human. You cannot trust me. So we need to look at our stalker, which is the audit trail,
right,
and figure out, what we're doing wrong.
Well, until they solve that problem, it sounds like you're going to be a very busy man, going in and out of places and doing these reviews. Yes.
Yeah. And implementing really complex processes for complex computerized systems. Yeah, that's what I do.
I know.
That's why I'm making, money.
Right.
It's my bread and butter.
Well, Matthew, we will be including in the show notes links to your website or ways to get in touch with you.
LinkedIn, of course.
Yes, your LinkedIn. So if people are needing some help, some clarity with this process, I know you're available.
I am 100% available.
Yeah. Awesome. Wow. I feel like we could sit here and talk about this for much, much longer, but we are out of time for today. So it's been great having you with me here in studio. I hope you have enjoyed the time as well. I don't know that we solved any problems, but we definitely know which problems are there. So that's a step in the right direction.
We're very good at doing that in the industry.
Yeah.
Causing
for sure.
more issues.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so thank you to Matthew LaPierre. We are going to include his contact information in the show notes for you if you'd like to get in touch with him and learn more about what he does. I also want to say thank you to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. We're here recording today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe in your favorite viewer or share with your friends. You can find out more by visiting ivtnetwork.com. Again, thanks for being with us today. Stay tuned for another show coming at you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.